Okay, welcome back. It is late January 1872. We left off in October last year, so a few months have passed, kind of a quarterly report, and been a tough few months. It's been a tough few months, really, in terms of contemplating the kind of decisions that we're going to have to make, especially with regard to Egypt. But also, it looks like the political crisis that kind of began last year has continued. We pretty much still have our kind of administrative and foreign policy stats zeroed out. We've still got army stats, so the army's still on side. But yeah, it looks like Abdelaziz is really just this kind of administrative chaos. There's chaos, the foreign ministry. And that's kind of hamstringing our moves, really. It's limiting what we can do in terms of international plays. And we've, of course, found ourselves locked into really three conflicts, two of which are resolved with minor powers and with Egypt, and we don't have the basis to end them, which in turn puts pressure on our foreign relations, especially with other great powers. It's a dicey situation to be in. Look, with regard to Egypt, it continues as a pretty robust insurgency. They continue to offer us peace, like, you know, chicken feed, really, even though we control the political heartland. And Egyptian units seem to spawn almost at the same rate that we inflict casualties. So you can see here, we conduct a sortie down towards Asyut. Really with the view of destroying Egyptian forces. They fall back, we inflict maybe 5,000-10,000 casualties, we fall back, and then new units kind of spawn. I don't think they're building them, I think that they're just insurgent forces. They're like irregular forces that are cropping up. So there's a kind of sense now that if we withdraw next year on the basis of accepting some kind of dogshit Egyptian offer, which is going to amount to us basically accepting Gazala, Siwa, stuff like that, you know, Port Sudan, not Suez, and Suez, let's face it, you know, was really the main thing that we're looking at, not least because it gave us kind of border claims on Dumia, Cairo. So yeah, it's not, you know, leaving with a really bad peace like that in the midst of a tough insurgency has all the feelings of kind of, you know, the Soviets leaving Afghanistan, 89, last chopper out of Saigon. It's like, it's not a peace that looks good. And yeah, it means that the conflict would not have been balanced positive, which is to say that the, you know, the damaging impact that it's had on our foreign relations, which if we continue is going to get worse, is just not worth Gazala and this kind of thing. And if this political crisis continues through the, you know, through the fall of Abdelaziz, through the reign of Mehmed or Murad the Fifth, and then into Abdul Hamid, yeah, it means that that's it. That basically, I mean, the administration, the domestic administration will no doubt recover, but it means that our foreign ministry will be kind of locked down as a meaningful tool. As I mean, you know, it means that we won't be able to make international plays. It's going to be a period of isolationism. Yeah, which means that, you know, we have no kind of recourse really with which to kind of deal with Egypt, to sort of right any sort of wrongs here. It means that we're going to have to just basically eat it. We're going to have to take the L, kind of move on. You know, it's not good. You know, maybe a little bit of hubris after a good start led to this, let's face it. But yeah, I kind of think that it might be at the point where we just, you know, we just accept what they offer us. And this is having repercussions as well. Bad administration leads to increased revolt risk. We've just had a really significant revolt in Yemen, the first in many years. And since the pacification of Yemen, of course, we've exploited it. We've got railroads, coffee and opium plantations all over the Yemen. It's a really important economic region for us now, and it's kind of paying for itself, you know. So large-scale revolt in Yemen, which we didn't have many forces in place to check, because we got a little bit slack. We removed a lot of our forces into the Hejaz, into trying to make moves in Eritrea, into making a landing in Mogadishu, in Somalia. So to that end, it means that we've lost control, okay, temporarily, of high-end plantations. These are plantations that have been upgraded. They require mechanical parts. They've got traction engines, and there's fertilizers and stuff like that. There's, you know, there's like there's hardware there. These aren't just, you know, small plantations. So we've lost temporary control over some of those. We are moving forces back in, and we're beginning to relocate some forces back from the Hejaz. Well, yeah, actually back from the Hejaz, but also Eritrea. Now, we're going to kind of slim up now our presence in the Hejaz and Eritrea. We'll keep a security detail in place to make sure that we can maintain our position there. But we are going to really look at, you know, just because of how economically important Yemen is, and because of the increased risk of revolts and stuff like that. Now, there's no intrinsic revolt risk there. So it might just be a kind of scripted event. It might pertain to low administration, I don't know. But it's not what we want to see. This will hurt our economy. Like, our economy is heavily dependent on the export of opium. Opium is a really important part of our economy. So even with even if we regain all of these plantations and subdue this rebellion very quickly, it's going to cost us, it's going to cost us billions. It's not what we want, really. It's strange to think that such a remote location, the Yemen really is the jewel in our crown economically. It's really economically important. It's a remote location, very far from Constantinople, that has, for example, railroads on almost every tile. Yeah, on every tile. You can't even say that for Anatolia. Or Mesopotamia. Yeah, it's a very important kind of colonial region for us economically. So it's alarming that that's happened. We'll deal with it. We'll get our boys back in. We'll get some boots on the ground, and yeah, we'll absolutely get into their kitchens and sort that out. But it's it's kind of pissed me off a little bit. It's not good. The economy's kind of going okay. It's sort of like it was looking really, really good for the last kind of like 3 or 4 turns where the domestic market was climbing, exports were climbing, and then it's very suddenly slackened off again. So it's a little bit, within the larger cycle of boom and bust, there's a small cycle happening. This is the poorest that we've seen it in some time. And with 900 valued imports and only 1,200 exports, we're seeing that our trade balance is getting tighter. There's nothing we can do about that. Once we've upgraded our farms to large plantations with that, there's no option to like downgrade them again. That's just how they operate now. So our economy requires a lot more coal than it ever did. Not just because we've got railroads everywhere. Our agricultural plantations now consume coal. Our merchant fleet now consumes a lot more coal. So our economy consumes much, much more coal than it ever did. And it means that we have to import, even with all of our coal production sites exploited, upgraded with railroad access, we're importing 50, 60, 70 units of coal per fortnight. And that's really just keeping our head above water. So we're a long way off being kind of coal sufficient. Even if we could exploit all of these sites in Drobeta, upgrade them and give it railroad access, I don't think that we'd be self-sufficient in coal. So we are a net coal importer and will be for the foreseeable future. And without any kind of diplomatic options, when I'm thinking of sites, for example, where there's a bit of coal access like Tabriz, unless we kind of have some kind of scripted event that prospects coal somewhere in Anatolia, which I don't think is going to happen. But unless that happens, or Europe, yeah, we have no real way of finding any more coal, and we're going to be locked into imports. We import a lot of chemicals. With that in mind, I've been carefully looking through the Academy of Sciences because we're investing a lot into the Navy. But I've started to look at some other things because we have been kind of building up a really nice stockpile. So major chemical companies is one thing. I cannot find any technologies related to increased coal yield. We've got factory illumination, which 7 new structures. So that's probably all of the factories, but it might also relate to coal. I don't know. I'm just thinking that artificial illumination. This is not electricity yet. This is, I guess gas lighting. But you thought that has some kind of implication for resource extraction as well? I don't know. It's going to be a case of we'll find out sort of thing. It's still worth investing in. But it doesn't mean that now we are putting much more pressure on our state revenue because we've broadened our investments. We're also looking at some army technologies like volley guns. We don't want to fall behind too much. Volley guns, some of these things are a bit of a qualitative leap. We might have exactly the same kind of technology with everything else, but if we end up engaging a big Russian army and they've got access to volley guns and just 1 or 2 technologies that's going to give them a big edge, even if we win, we could be looking at hideous casualties, which then stops any further, offensive operations. They can recover their losses. They can go into counterattacks. These technologies do stack up. So we are looking at 1 or 2 army technologies as well. Artillery forces is a long-term thing because we're obviously so far behind, and we're investing in steel breech loaders. That's an 1870 technology. Once that's finished, that should give us access to a new line of artillery forces, 6 new units in force pool. So that's going to be regular artillery, howitzers, which are heavy guns. I guess also defensive guns. That's 4 because the 2 variety of defensive guns are coastal emplacements. So that's interesting that it's 6. That means that there might be 2 new varieties of artillery. It might be that those little light guns, those little colonial guns, which the Ottoman Empire starts with a couple of those, but also we got a lot of them in Yemen during the insurgency. The Yemenis had a lot of these early modern kind of very small cannons that we captured, which we kept, you know. So that might provide us with an option to kind of upgrade those, which is interesting. So that's definitely something worth investing in. I'm going to keep a really careful eye on sort of, on kind of economic technologies that sort of filter through, because mining, we need, really. I've looked through all of them. I'm even looking at technologies that might be a kind of, that might be kind of related to mining in the long term, you know, like that might have some kind of branch off. But I can't see anything. The other thing is Elementary Education Act. One thing that'll do is increase across the board the maximum allowed for education, 5 points. It means that when we invest in education, as we're doing now, which costs a lot of state revenue, it's 500, so we'll have 1,900 state revenue next term without an income, which is the lowest we'd have been in some years. This is only a temporary boon. It gives us a temporary boon in terms of our overall literacy, because education is very restricted anyway, so it broadens it very, very slightly, but then it begins to sort of trickle down again to about its natural area, which is 13-12%, which is basically the ruling elite of the Ottoman Empire. Their children are literate, you know, so it only has a very limited short-term effect, but that limited short-term effect does give us across-the-board benefits in Academy of Sciences, I believe. It seems to be the case that Academy of Sciences enjoys a brief, small acceleration after each investment. We are starting to dip into the state fund now. We've been building up a really big kind of rainy day war chest for a few years, and we have kept parallel investments in the Academy of Sciences whilst increasing the amount of state revenue. Again, a lot of this comes from taxation on transactions, our census taxes, taxation on tariffs, because we have a fairly aggressive tariff, fairly rigid sort of trade quotas that we set up intentionally, which also puts pressures on foreign relations, because ours are quite tough, because we want to protect our economy, because we've got a vulnerable, especially to begin with, a very vulnerable economy, you know. So all those things, the gold exchange, have given us a really nice income of state revenue. We've managed to do it. We've managed to find that sweet spot where we're getting good money, low inflation. You know, if you import too much gold, you convert too much, you get heavy inflation, and it ends up biting you in the arse down the road sort of thing. It means everything's unaffordable. You end up being like Spain in the 18th century, importing gold from Latin America, can't afford a sausage sort of thing. So we found the sweet spot. We've got good money, but we are starting to dip into it now. So some of the things that we're spending money on is division-sized forces. At the moment, only a couple of divisions. We still need to divvy these signal regiments out. We've got light cavalry brigade. We've got a couple of divisions in construction. These divisions are earmarked as a permanent security detail for southern Greece. They're large enough that they should hold southern Greece. They should be able to effectively counter any kind of insurgency, any kind of rebellion, and freeze up the main conventional army led by Mehmed Ali, whose main command is in Patras at the moment. That allows him to retake up a deployment in either Salonika or Sofia or somewhere like that. Our army deployments at the moment consist of that army. We've got an army in Bucharest. We have an army in Sarajevo, the third army up, kind of shadowing Austrian forces in Fiume. We have an army in Eastern Anatolia, which is over here, which is comprised of one guard corps and a host of mountain divisions. This is specialized mountain troops under Abdi Pasha. Abdi Pasha, interesting character. You've been with us from the beginning, you know. There's a handful of generals now that are senior generals. There's him. I don't think we have Abdul Karim Nadir anymore. Him and one or two others that were basically 2-star generals in 1850. They're probably much older guys now, 20 years later, and they're senior commanders. But he commands the army in Eastern Anatolia. We have got a newly formed Suleiman Pasha, 2-star lieutenant general. He's just formed in kind of Constantinople, or his command has just formed. He looks pretty good. Tactician of Ilan, admired commander, poor subordinates. When he's promoted to a 3-star, if that comes to pass, then those might change a little bit, but that provides you with an idea as to what we might look at. You will have probably one malus, which will affect the amount of command points that he has. We're going to send him to the east, I think, put him in command of the Guard Corps in Abdi Pasha's army. So 6 days for him and his command. And the other kind of expenses then, we've built the signal forces, we're going to divvy those out. We are going to be looking at a bit of an army reorganisation this year. In 72, we want to get our forces out of Egypt, I think. That's the plan for 72. And then look at an army reorganisation. So we'll divvy out the signal service asset units to every single command that we have, and just restructure our forces a little bit and look at an army expansion. I'm going to create an additional 3 corps, 2 cavalry divisions, service asset units, and a supply train. And I think we're going to keep that army probably in central or kind of western Anatolia as a reserve army. That's my thinking. The other investment is in the navy. So our naval construction program has begun. And this is it. Oh, well, I didn't mean to do that. It doesn't matter. This is in construction. So we have 2 squadrons of corvettes, which pleasingly have authentic Ottoman corvette names for the period. And these are our first proper, full-size ironclads in construction. Their main benefit is protection and penetration. Now, a timber, traditional corvette, has a protection penetration of 1. So it's like 5 times more. So yeah, they're ironclads. They're more expensive to build. They take longer to build. 1860 to 1875 tech. So they're kind of still within the kind of bracket of modern technology. They will be eclipsed, I believe, once we have dedicated ironclad corvettes. These are going to be much more sophisticated ironclad corvettes. And I guess that'll be 75 to 85 or something like that. But yeah, it begins kind of thing. These are expensive. They do take a long time. We're not going to do it all at once because we don't want to put even more pressure on our foreign relations by engaging in some kind of massive crash kind of naval expansion program. We want to build a couple of squadrons, initially get them to replace traditional corvette squadrons or frigate squadrons, you know, and kind of do it that way. We'll do it a block at a time, but we will first of all look to replace all of the squadrons that we have in our main fleet, which is to say, when I say the main fleet, we're talking the kind of the fleet reserve, which is this, the first fleet, which is the active fleet that we use to conduct operations, and then also the Persian Gulf fleet, which is, I believe, 1 squadron of frigates. I moved it up to Kuwait temporarily. No, I didn't. Where did I? Oh, no, actually, no, I sorted it down just last turn. There were reports of pirates in the Sea of Oman. So yeah, it's 1 squadron of frigates, 2 squadrons of corvettes. We'll place all of these first of all, and then we'll look at expansion. And by the time these have all been replaced, we'll have the new kind of next generation ironclads, frigates, corvettes, and monitors also, and that will allow further expansion of the navy. And we'll look to probably double the size of the navy, I think. And we've already got a pretty good navy in terms of raw combat power. I mean, our army is slightly larger than France, so that combat power gap is beginning to close. Our navy is slightly weaker than France. We're probably the 3rd, well, actually Japan, surprisingly, you guys already have a bigger navy than us. My god, it's only 72. We're probably the 4th or 5th biggest navy. In real life by now, the Ottomans did have a bigger navy, to be fair. The Ottomans had the sort of the 3rd biggest navy in the world after Britain and France. We want to position ourselves as probably the dominant Mediterranean navy, so 3rd place would be good for me, you know, but a significant expansion. The lower the combat power here, Britain is 5, so it's basically 5 times the size of our navy. We'll get that down to about 3, so the British are 3 times the size of our navy. Might even put us into 2nd place, but the lower this figure becomes, the worse our relations get with Britain. And I would hazard a guess that the British would be very sensitive. The British AI would be very sensitive to naval combat power parity. There's a good chance that the closer we get to Britain, the more likely they are of declaring war, you know, with a view of destroying our navy. So we're going to play it careful, you know, but we do want to be... Bear in mind that if we ever go to war with Britain, Britain will have a massive navy, but will only ever be able to, you know, devote a fraction of its strength to the Mediterranean. It will have to maintain a large force of the home fleet, the metropole. It will have sprawling colonial obligations. So if we can build a large enough navy, we probably will have naval parity with the British in the Mediterranean. And that's the basic principle of what is called a fleet in being. It's how the Italian naval construction program is based. That's the kind of arithmetic that they use. The Japanese naval construction program is the idea that even if you have a hegemonic power with sprawling kind of maritime obligations, that you probably still achieve a kind of a parity. And the British themselves had a naval construction program where they had enough forces placed in the Mediterranean that they could achieve parity with the dominant maritime power in that region. So it's kind of fleet in being mentality, but I think it's a fairly, you know, it's before aircraft carriers, so it's a perfectly logical kind of, arithmetic-based approach to naval expansion. So, we've got our first ironclads in construction as well. That is pretty much it. I don't think there's anything else really to address other than, yeah, the continuing war in Egypt, the continuing paralyzing economic crisis, or political crisis rather. We'll see how 72 goes, you know what I mean? But yeah, it's been a little bit of a kind of the closing gap. And the economy's become much more complex is one thing I'm really noticing as well. We're importing, in terms of the value of the commodities that we're importing, more in a fortnight now than our entire economy produced in a fortnight in 1850. To give you an idea, that's how much bigger our economy is. We still have a positive trade balance, but it's much narrower. So the amount of capital that we are generating each term is beginning to, you know, there's pressures on private capital now. We're importing even manufactured goods because, yeah, I mean, like, we generate capital faster than we generate manufactured goods, which means we end up sitting on a lot of capital, but we don't have the hardware necessary to begin kind of plant and stuff like that. In terms of our industrial planning, I should point out, it's not really industrial, it's kind of more a military kind of thing, but we are now extending the railroad from Salonika down to Athens with a view, really, this is mostly security related, that we can get fast access to the region, and we can basically strategically redeploy large forces from, for example, Adrianople or Sofia or wherever, quite quickly towards Athens. It's looking like, really, because even if we left Greece now, Greece isn't going to offer us any kind of peace. I mean, Greece could be offering us a white peace now. They've not offered us anything, neither has Wallachia, which means that neither of these minor powers has access to any kind of diplomatic resources. That might change in time. That means that we are locked into a military occupation. It looks nice on the map when you zoom out and you think, yeah, you know, 18th century Ottoman Empire, that's what we want. But yeah, it's questionable how worth it is, frankly. But nevertheless, it is what it is. So we want to free these forces up, get division-sized forces in place, and get railroad access into central Greece, connecting Athens up with Salonika and the rest of our national railroad system, so that we can intervene much more kind of effectively there. That's going to be it. It's late January 1872. There's probably something I've forgotten. I always tend to think after the video, forgot to mention that. But next video, I guess, will be in a few months' time, 3-4 months' time. It'll be a sort of either spring or summer report. If something significant happens in the meantime, probably I'll make a video. The turn that we actually accept the peace deal with the Greeks, that seems to make a bit of sense. Hopefully, by the time of the next video, Aden will be wrapped up and we'll have restored control, and we'll have those opium and coffee plantations humming again and generating nice profits for our ruling class. I'll leave it there then. And yeah, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.